and hopefully, the messages that are brought from the speakers at this workshop and the discussion we have after can be relayed back into the main hall, perhaps in the final plenary or something. Racism is increasing under the current Condem coalition government, and it's not just racism in terms of austerity, it's about racist policies and ideas that are being promoted by the government, and that's being fueled by the messages that are coming out from the right-wing press. So we know that black and minority ethnic and migrant communities are being scapegoated and they're being blamed for the cuts. And that's been used by the far right to say, well, actually, the reason there's no housing, there's no jobs, is because of all these people coming to the country, they're taking everything. Britain's full. We keep seeing this term, Britain is full, being used. And we know that that's not true. We know that it's because of the way the government have handled the austerity and the cuts that they're making, which are unnecessary. They're ideological cuts, they're cuts that don't need to be made, are the real reason. And I think it's really crucial that when we hear all of these nasty, racist comments, debates that are happening on the radio, on the TV, in the newspapers, that we counter them and we challenge them by telling the truth and dispelling the myths and lies. So black people are being impacted by the cuts, and I'm using black in the political sense, so I'm talking about BME people, migrant people when I use the term black. Are being disproportionately impacted by the cuts to jobs, the cuts to services, and the cuts to education, and that includes, the tripling of EMA and the scrapping of EMA and the tripling of tuition fees. And when jobs are cut and when services are cut, the services are being cut in the poorest communities. So the biggest cuts to councils have happened in the most deprived communities, areas largely that are officially declared deprived, and they are the areas where more black and migrant people live because of the discrimination that already existed in society, meaning that people earn less, live in poor housing and so on and so forth. And there is a particular impact on black women that I'm going to go on to speak about. And in addition to all of the things to do with austerity, we've had the government saying, Cameron saying, multiculturalism has failed. Well, actually, it hasn't failed. It couldn't possibly fail, because we wouldn't live in the multicultural, diverse societies we live in if it had failed. They wouldn't exist. The deaths at the hands of the state, policing, the stop and search of black people, the criminal justice system, they are all things that are impacting on black communities. The scapegoating of migrants, which I've already mentioned, but also the immigration bill, which they're looking to introduce very quickly, which will create an apartheid state in the UK. So what we're talking about is a system of institutional racism. We had the Macpherson report, and 20 years on, after Stephen Lawrence's murder, we're seeing that actually institutional racism hasn't gone away from the police and from public institutions. Actually, it's increasing every day because racism is promoted by the government and by the media. So it's become acceptable. So those people that held racist views before, but perhaps wouldn't express them in the workplace and in the communities we live in, actually they feel quite emboldened to express their racist views because they think, well, we're backed up by the government, we're backed up by policies, and we're backed up by laws that says actually it's acceptable to be racist, and why shouldn't we be? Because it's all these black people that are taking our jobs, it's all of them that are taking the housing, and they're taking all the benefits. So we really do need to dispel those myths. And black women have multiple impact of discrimination on them. So yes, they're impacted because of all the things I've talked about in terms of race. They're also impacted by all the things that are being talked about today at this event because of gender. But there are particular things that are impacting on black women because they're black and women. It's about the combination, stereotypes and labels that are applied to them, and lack of cultural awareness and particular issues around that. And this workshop is focused on racism, But actually, I think we need to have a discussion about race and gender and what happens if you're a black woman. And what happens to black women has a knock-on impact on young black people and black children as the primary carers of young black people and children, and actually primary carers, of extended family members, which might be disabled members, which might be elderly relatives. Because of the cuts to the welfare system, that means actually families are being dependent on even more to do the things that would have been provided through some services. There would have been some support, and that support has gone. And I think that, we can't, as a black woman, I can't switch and say, well, I'm a woman today because I'm at this women's conference, and I'm black another minute. I am a black woman, and what impacts on me and what impacts on my life and my family unit is because I'm a black woman. So I think that needs to be understood by our broader movement, and that we need to ensure that black women are included on the agendas about women, on the agendas about austerity. And it isn't just black women, there are other groups that have multiple impacts of the cuts, disabled women and so on. You might be a black disabled woman, that's a triple impact on you. And I think that, because of the system that we're facing and the struggles that we're going through, there are lots of black women that are having to hold down 2 or 3 jobs and try and balance that with care responsibilities, raising a family, struggling to make ends meet. And that means that coming to an event like this is really difficult. Even the cost of getting here, the cost of registering and coming in, and just the time, because they may be working, all sorts of shifts and all sorts of hours, which means they don't have their Saturday free, and they don't have evenings free. So I think one of the things we need to think about is how do we bring this movement and the assemblies to the black women and the wider black communities that we live alongside. So that might mean that we need to go to advisory services, specialist services, community groups, and the places where black women may come together and black people more broadly may come together, faith groups, and bring what we're doing to those venues, because that might be the way where we can have that dialogue and discussion and include them. And I think it's essential that those that are most impacted by austerity are at the forefront of the campaigning against austerity. So we do need to look at creative ways and supportive ways in which we can involve everybody who is impacted, so that we have a strong voice and we can talk about the things that are happening to us in our communities. There's a group of young mothers in East London, in Newham, who are being kicked out of their housing, and they're fighting. And I've seen horrible things about them, demonising them, and they are black and white women, and they're all young women, and they're being told, well, actually the housing in Newham is for families, not for these black women with their children. What are they then if they're not a family? Are you not a family? If you're a mother and you have a child, you are a family. You don't have to have 2.4 children and a dog and a man and a woman together to make up a family. Families are more diverse than that, and there's a range of families. But that's the kind of demonisation of them. So you've got Newham Council saying, well, we're going to get rid of your supportive housing that you live in, but you can go and live somewhere else. We'll give you social housing. You can go 200 miles away. Does that mean they go away from all the networks that they depend on? So for those women that, with young babies, they're not going to come here today, but actually bringing our movement to them and giving them support and seeing what we can do to support their campaigns is crucial to that fight. And I think that we need to do that. And in terms of the, Sabi's statement, I just want to finish by talking about a couple of things. That event is another really important way in which we can involve all communities. And it is for everybody, so it's for migrant groups, it's for black people, it's for trade unions, it's for anti-cuts groups, anti-racist groups, it's for all of our communities. And I know that there are coaches being booked and going from all over the UK to bring people to that event on the 22nd of March. But for any of you that are from unions or from organisations that are organising coaches, I've got a request that you free up some of those places on those coaches for people that are in your community. And the reason for that is that there are a lot of people who are on low pay, who are working full-time, but they're having to go to food banks, and they're having to